will tune and tone. Well, we are at the top of the hour and we can get ourselves going again here in session 2 of day 3, the last day of the International Online Symposium on the New Paradigm in Politics, brought to you by the Laszlo Institute of New Paradigm Research. So we are in flow, which is exactly where we should be. And today we are in this co-creative mode for those of you who are joining now. And we are going to be, I want to make sure that we can also bring Anneloes up here with me to share the screen. We're going to be, together with Anneloes, frankly, Anneloes is going to be handling the lion's share of the process, but just wanted to welcome everyone back and to remind us that today is truly about harvesting, about bringing your voice into the play, about connecting with others, about exploring what it means to be in this interbeing expression of common unity, of community. And this is a chance for us to really share our views and and co-create, not just share our views in a random mix, but truly co-create a set of guiding activity principles and that bring to bear the kind of things we've been talking about over the last couple of days. Any words on that before we introduce our speakers, Anneloes?
Yes, I just in the break had a lovely conversation with my dear friend Jean Houston, who's been actively participating also in the conference. And she was giving a very good tip for us, and that is that in order to build these deeper synergies of collaboration, which what we're going to be working on today or in this session now, she said, think about it as a narrative. And so to also be aware, what's the story of us? What's the deeper new mythos emerging? And even in the breakout groups, when we're going to be exploring how can we collaborate together, when you share about your own work with each other, to share about it as a story. So to really start even to experience this day, if you were to tell about that to someone else later as a story that can also inspire hope during difficult times. What's the story of us here? Who are we in this emerging story? What's the story of the co-creation of a new paradigm in politics and governance? So that's a wonderful wisdom from Jean Houston that we can take with us for the rest of the session.
Thank you, Anneloes. And this reminds me of some of the things we've talked about so much, and that is about remembering ourselves in this story, in the great hoops of life, as they say. And that remembering means bringing our membership back into these circles. And that means restoring or restorying, as you are saying right now, restorying the narrative that we are co-creating, and that is co-creating us. This is part of this sense of being danced, not just dancing ourselves into existence. So without further ado, what I'm going to do is I'm going to invite Bill Stranger on here. Anneloes and I will hop off the stage, and Bill will introduce the next speakers.
I'm really happy to introduce our next two speakers. When we were spinning up this event, talking about what it would take to actually have a productive engagement from all of us, the first person I thought of was Tom Atlee, whose book, The Tao of Democracy, I read a number of years ago and thought was just the product of a wise and experienced intellect and altogether activist. It turned out the more I knew about it, the more I found out about it, the more I discovered how productive he's been. Tom has been working on this matter really of co-intelligence research going back to the 1980s. And he's really wanted to shift his attention from the conflict process and from the arguments to how do we create what he calls a wise democracy. So he's been working in this whole matter the conscious evolution of social systems and a sacred science-based understanding of evolutionary dynamics. And for the last number of years, it's been much, much more about public wisdom in relative economics and to sustainability and to this developing what he calls a wise democracy pattern language. And he's hooked up with this remarkable young man named Andy Pace, and together bringing technology, mindfulness training together to create this kind of collaborative process. He's not only been enacting with all kinds of groups for many, many years, but also blogging about quite extensively on his website. So I'm going to just click the send button now over in my chat room and send you the links to their two websites. Tom Atlee, thank you so much. Please take us forward in this process. And Andy, join in when you're ready to as well.
Okay, well, this is interesting because I had many versions of what I was going to say before came on, and then last night at about 4:30 in the morning, I had a whole nother realization of what I wanted to share. So this is going to be a little more nonlinear, but I think it'll be really interesting. I was asked to share the story of how I got into this, and it was on the Great Peace March in 1986 was the watershed experience of my life, and I want to start sharing. So the Great Peace March was for global nuclear disarmament. It left from LA with 1,200 people and collapsed in the desert. What was remarkable was when it fell apart, we no longer had resources and we no longer had anybody in charge. So we had 400 people who hung around in the desert for about 2 weeks and then started out again, going to, this is us marching through the desert. What do you do with 400 people? I mean, if the logistics of moving and locating 400 people were just gigantic, and since there was nobody in charge, we had to do it all ourselves. And you can imagine the kinds of chaos and conflict that were potentially involved in that, and there was a lot. But basically what I learned, we arrived in Washington, D.C., our goal. We arrived in Washington, D.C. with 1,200 people again. So it was a lesson in self-organizing dynamics. How do you handle all the details of that kind of an operation? And we basically were guided by we had a shared goal, and we were very passionate, of course, to be able to do all this. This was very important to us. This was what some people call an evolutionary goal or purpose. We basically learned on the run, so to speak, how to use our diversity and the disturbances among us creatively. And I'm going to come back to that theme over and over again, because that's one of the most basic patterns or design principles on my, well, this is, somebody drove up with ice cream in the back of their truck while we're in the middle, of the Mojave Desert. So that's what you're seeing there. And the idea that what we have in politics is a lot of diversity and disturbance. And to the extent we can use that creatively to generate wisdom and good outcomes, that's a way to uplift what goes on in politics gigantically. So this inspired me. When the march was over, it inspired me to, I should say that in the Tao of Democracy, the book that Bill referred to, can you see that, Tao of Democracy? There is a prologue in there which describes the most intense experience of collective intelligence I had on the march, and you can look at it online on the TaoDemocracy.com website. And I began to evolve into this co-intelligence, which is basically holistic intelligence, looking at what intelligence would look like if you had interconnectedness, wholeness, and co-creativity, if you took them seriously, like all the different kinds of thinking and feeling, ways we engage with the world, which I call multimodal intelligence. And then collaborative intelligence, the working together, even when you're not talking, you're like Aikido and permaculture, is like working together with the world. Collective intelligence is much bigger than individual intelligence. It's how groups and organizations and communities can be intelligent as living entities. And wisdom taking more into account than we usually take into account when we're just being smart. and resonant intelligence, which a lot of people experience in groups, you know, the sense of resonance of synergy and linkage with each other, and universal intelligence, which the Laszlo Institute has a lot of focus on in terms of the quantum connections we have and the interconnections and the way nature itself is intelligent. The evolution of nature is a gigantic learning process. And I began to wonder how to apply this to our collective, organizing ourselves collectively in terms of our governance, our politics, our economics. And as Bill noticed, I created the Wise Democracy Pattern Language. And these are the 96 patterns in the pattern language. And you can, if you want, you can visit this website, wd-pl.com, which is also linked to my co-intelligence site. And you can read some of these and get a sense of what sorts of things are involved. Using diversity and disturbance one, which I mentioned to you earlier. I love this image, which is every one of the patterns has an image associated with it. And they're all a card set. This is a picture of the card for this one. And you can download the cards for free, or you can buy a bunch of them in a printed deck. And then there's related patterns. You can click on patterns that are related to this one. There are questions that you can use to explore the pattern in more detail and how it applies to situations you're involved in. Underneath the pictures that I have, there's a video. I talk about using diversity and disturbance creatively, and then give examples and resources. So there's lots of links. So every single one of the patterns has this. So it's almost like an encyclopedia for how to go about creating a wise democracy. And wise democracy is my version of this goal that we're sharing here, which is the new paradigm democracy. And I collected, over the years, I have been collecting processes. I have a feeling many of the people here are interested or familiar with World Cafe. In World Cafe, people sit, usually there's a table, but you don't need to have a table. In these cases, people don't. There's 3 to 5 people sitting around in a circle. And there's some topic they're all interested in, and they discuss it. And then a bell goes off and people get up and move to another table. When they get to that table, they talk about what they heard at the previous table. And so there's an interesting way in which they have the opportunity to be in a small group conversation with lots of airtime and getting to know people. And then they're exposed to what happened elsewhere without ever losing touch with the small group activities. And you can go through many rounds of this. You can go, very often it's 3 to 5 rounds where they'll ring the bell and people go to new tables. And so it's a mixing, a kind of stirring up of what's going on with that topic. And at the end, they harvest from what's there, from what comes up when people speak what was meaningful to them. And it's the people who develop World Cafe are masters of creating questions to explore. They were once had a project to consult with a school in Italy that was coming apart. The question they gave for that school was, what could this school also be? Which takes it from, here's a whole pile of problems that we're trying to wrestle with, to the vision that sort of leaps right over all those problems. And it was a very stimulating cafe, and the school ended up surviving their problem. The idea that you can do this in a whole community, you can have many cafes going simultaneously. You could engage thousands of people in the cafe. And when I'm thinking of creating community intelligence, I'm often thinking of doing that. Also having what's called a mini public or a citizen council. This is a particularly advanced form of citizen council that's practiced in Austria and now Germany. A few other places are experimenting with it. Thing that is characteristic of all citizen councils and citizen assemblies and citizen juries is they pick people at random from the community. So you're trying to get the diversity of a community embodied in a group of a few dozen or a few hundred people, depending on the size of the council. You want, again, we're back to the diversity, using diversity and disturbance creatively. When you pick people at random, You're getting people who are sort of across the spectrum of opinions, across the spectrum of experiences. They are interacting. And in this particular one, it uses a process called dynamic facilitation in the citizen councils that are in Austria. And dynamic facilitation is the most powerful method I know for transforming conflict into breakthroughs and shared understandings. The woman here with the green shirt, the green jacket, as a facilitator, there's some people that's just, sometimes it's just one facilitator. Here they divide the task up into two. And her job is basically to make sure the person who's speaking feels fully heard. And there's a feeling heard is another one of the patterns in the pattern language. But when somebody feels heard, there's an opening up. There's a relaxation. They don't have to push. They don't have to assert. They don't have to back off and run away. They can just be there. So she's going to go around to each person and she's listening to each person until they feel heard. While she's doing that, the rest of the people are witnessing a sort of idealized form of communication, of listening. And she's reflecting back to the person going, here's what I think you're saying. Am I getting it right? And so keeping on going until the person agrees that she's really got it. In the meantime, this woman is writing stuff down on the chart pads. And there's a chart pad for problem statements. There's a chart pad for possible solutions. There's a chart pad for concerns, and another one for data. And she's just choosing which chart pad to do and writing it down on them. So another thing that's happening is as this reflective listening is happening, a piece of the larger puzzle that nobody saw when they walked in the room is being heard and seen by the people in the room, and also recorded on the chart pad. See, these previous chart pads are being posted so everybody can look at them. Another brilliant thing, which I experienced personally in a dynamic facilitation training, is somebody says, I think that's a stupid idea. Facilitator comes up and says, give it to me, what's your concern? Translates the interruption, the disturbance into being a concern. And what happens is people are getting more and more open as more and more of the big picture is showing up, and they start to be creative together about the big picture, the mess that they've generated, and coming up, that's what generates the breakthroughs in that. So here's our fundamental unity, common ground. There's many different, our interconnectedness, our shared humanity, all that, the quantum non-dual connection, et cetera. And our diversity and unity and diversity are two parts of wholeness, and they're just there. So based on your unity, you're beginning to look at the diversity more carefully. You're having and doing that with citizens, including diverse citizens, ways to include diverse stakeholders, and then have generated interactions among them, which is mostly conversation and many different ways to do that. And through that, there's an expansion and deepening of understanding, of alignment, of relationship, of possibility. And that's a form of wisdom, the ability to take into account what needs to be taken into account for long-term broad benefit. And you're getting a bigger picture understanding of what's needed, and that governs action of different kinds. That understanding becomes part of the new shared understandings which become common ground. I see all of this, my way of thinking about it is the evolving wholeness. You're facilitating the evolution of healthy wholeness using diversity and disturbance creatively. So that's my stumbly way of presenting all this. And since this will be on the material that is shared later, you can come back to it if you want, or you can write to me at cii@igc.org and ask for the PDF. Check, that's it. Andy.
Thank you, Tom. One of these ways of finding sort of shared common ground moving forward is also, there's a platform called Pol.is, which I personally have been using with local government in the UK quite a bit. And it identifies clusters of opinion, and it also very usefully identifies consensus as well. So what I'm going to do is very quickly, I'm going to share a video with you that is going to tell you how you can participate on this platform for this symposium. And given that there's 100 of you here on this call, it would be fantastic if you spend after this session about 5 minutes on it or something like that. That would generate really rich data about what we collectively think about how this new paradigm in politics should look. One way you can contribute to the conversations taking place on day 3 of the Symposium of New Paradigm in Politics is by participating in the conversation we've set up on Pol.is. Pol.is is an artificial intelligence powered open source engagement platform that identifies areas of consensus. It's a tool to map how a community is thinking on an issue, a kind of survey co-created by the people taking it. It has been used successfully in Taiwan at a national level to create policies and solve intractable issues. It's also being used by local government and organisations all over the world. For the symposium, we'll be using it to respond to this question. What needs to happen to catalyse a new paradigm politics? The way you participate is by voting, agreeing, disagreeing, or passing on the statements that have been submitted by other participants. The statements appear in random order, and you can spend as much time as you like voting on the statements. If, after a while of voting, you see that your ideas or opinions aren't represented, or you think that there's a slightly different way of framing things that might be acceptable to more people and generate consensus, you can go ahead and enter your own comment for others to vote on. An interesting part of this co-created survey is that you can get an idea of the opinion landscape by scrolling down to the bottom where you see the visualization. After enough people have participated, these shapes representing distinct clusters of opinion will appear. You will see your anonymous icon inside a group of people that voted in similar ways to you. The buttons at the bottom allow us to explore the visualization and see which statements brought each group together, the statements that made them different from the other groups, and which statements everyone could get behind. This will help the breakout groups on day 3 of the symposium get a more complete picture when creating their collective action map. You can share this with friends and colleagues you think would be interested in the new paradigm politics. The link to participate is posted in this YouTube's video description below. Thank you and have fun participating. So there you go. I will post that link into the chat, and thanks very much.
That was very, very useful and insightful. And I think that gives us the right energy and momentum to go back into the working groups. So I have just posted in the chat the link again. It's the same document. What I've done is I've just moved for this session, so it is session 2, I've moved it on the top of the document so that you don't get confused. So when you go into that, look for the top of the document, says session 2. The purpose of our next working group session is to explore how can we collaborate together for creating that paradigm shift in politics and governance. You will be again assigned to breakout groups with about 5 people per group, sometimes a bit more, sometimes a bit less people. You will be moved back again in time. You'll get a notice as well. Watch out again for the bottom of your screen, which will tell you which working group you're going to be assigned to, and then use that same number on your Google Doc to then share your IDs. What we'd like to ask everyone again is be mindful of time sharing, so let everybody speak. And start to just introduce yourself very briefly in terms of what is the work that you are doing for this paradigm shift. And then you can start to see, is there a pattern here with all of you together in this small breakout group? Are there potentials for synergy, for collaboration, and just write down your ideas. You will have 40 minutes to do this, so it's ample of time to really explore that together, collaboration, for this new paradigm in politics and governance. And when we come back, we're going to just spend about 10 to 15 minutes to hear some highlights from each of you, from some of your groups, from whoever would like to share.